The day 250. Harleys lined up outside an elementary school didn't start with sirens or flashing lights. It started with one quiet biker standing in a gravel parking lot, watching a grown man drag an 8-year-old boy by the jersey in front of his teammates. By sundown, the whole league board, half the town, and one red-faced coach would be staring at a solid wall of black leather vests and cold, calm eyes. And what those bikers did that evening didn't just save one scared kid, it rewrote the rules for that school, that team, and every adult who thought they could bully a child and walk away. Before we dive into the story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means so much and helps us keep bringing you more amazing stories like this one. A few hours earlier, the field had looked harmless. The grass along the baselines glowed in the setting sun. The bleachers clinked with coffee cups, and bats rang hollow in the cages. On the far end of the third base bench, a small boy sat alone, knees pulled up, clutching an oversized glove to his chest like a shield. His name was Henry Leo Parker. Henry on the roster. Leo, to the few people who'd seen his face light up when he talked about baseball. Leo's uniform didn't quite fit. His socks sagged, his cap slid too low, and a streak of dried dirt ran across his cheek. He should have blended in with the other boys, just another kid figuring out how to keep his eye on the ball. Instead, there was a little pocket of silence around him. Teammates kept their distance, voices dropping whenever they glanced his way, fingers suddenly busy with loose laces. They knew what it meant when Leo went quiet and alone. Around this field, trouble had a name. Coach Miller. Coach Miller was a big man stuffed into a too-tight windbreaker, neck turning a deeper shade of red with every mistake. He didn't coach to teach. He coached to win, to stack trophies in the league office until no one dared question him. Right now, his hand was clamped in the front of Leo's jersey, bunching the fabric so tight it bit into the boy's throat. He yanked Leo up onto his toes and leaned in so close the boy could feel each word hit his face. "You're a disgrace to this team," he snarled. "You drop one more ball like that and you're done. Do you hear me?" Leo tried to nod, but the grip on his collar pinned his breath in his chest. The sounds of the field, bats cracking, kids laughing on the playground, parents talking, all dropped away. There was only the sharp burn of cloth digging into his neck, the sour coffee on Miller's breath, and the heavy thud of his own heartbeat. A thought looped through his mind, small and frantic. I messed up. I always mess up. If I were better, he wouldn't be mad. If I were better, Dad wouldn't have to see me like this. Out past the outfield fence, a low rumble rolled across the parking lot. Heads turned automatically. In this town, everyone knew that sound. A black and chrome Harley eased into a space, engine idling low before the rider killed it with a twist of his wrist. He swung a boot to the ground, shrugged off his helmet, and slicked a hand through dark hair streaked with silver. On his bare bicep, a skull tattoo grinned beneath a black, sleeveless leather vest, the Hells Angels phoenix patch bright on his back. Around here, they called him Tank. Tank hadn't planned to make an entrance. He'd gotten off work early and decided, on a whim, to surprise his boy. To lean against the fence, anonymous in the crowd, and watch Leo snag a clean fly ball for once. In his mind, there had been nachos afterward, and shy pride in his son's eyes. Instead, the first thing he saw was Leo hanging by his jersey from a grown man's fist, feet barely scraping the concrete. From where Tank stood, he could see the tremor in his boy's arms, the way his glove lay abandoned on the dugout floor like it had given up, too. For a long, tight second, old habits rose in Tank like a punch. His fingers curled around his helmet until the leather creaked, every muscle from his jaw to his shoulders begging to close the distance and put Miller flat on his back. He knew exactly how to do it. The moves lived in his bones from a younger, angrier life. But there was another part of him now, the part that had rocked a newborn at 3 a.m. and sworn he'd never let his son grow up afraid of his father's temper. So he made himself breathe. He set the helmet gently on the seat of the Harley, rolled his shoulders back, and reached into his vest for his phone. On the other side of town, in a low bar that smelled like coffee and motor oil, a phone buzzed on a scarred wooden table. Bear, president of the Hells Angels, glanced down. The moment he saw Tank's name, the conversation around him dulled. He wore the same black sleeveless leather vest, the same phoenix patch, full-sleeve tattoos wrapping his arms, a skull inked on his bicep. He picked up on the first ring. Calls during kids' practice hours weren't social. "Tank," he said, skipping hello. "Talk to me." Out by the fence, Tank never took his eyes off the dugout. He watched Miller give Leo one last shake for emphasis and drop him back onto his heels. The boy stumbled, catching himself against the wall, shoulders jerking with a swallowed sob. Tank's voice, when it finally came, was low and level, the kind of calm that made decent men uneasy. "He put his hands on my son," Tank said. No swearing, no extra explanation. 7 words, hammered flat and cold. On the other end of the line, Bear went very still. He didn't ask what Leo had done. He didn't ask how bad it was, or how long it had been going on. In their world, a grown man laying hands on an 8-year-old, especially a brother's kid, wasn't coaching. It was crossing a line you didn't cross back from. The bar seemed to lean in. Then Bear stood up, chair scraping quietly against the floor. "You stay put," he said. "You don't touch the coach. You don't touch anybody. You just keep eyes on your boy. We'll handle the rest." He ended the call and turned to his men. To understand why that single sentence could move so many men so fast, you have to know how long Coach Miller's shadow had stretched over that field. For years, the league board had pointed to his trophies and newspaper clippings whenever parents complained. "He's tough, but he makes winners," they'd say. "Baseball builds character. If your kid can't handle it, maybe this isn't his sport." They never sat in the car afterward with a boy who stared out the window in silence, flinching when someone raised their voice. For Henry Leo, baseball had started as joy. It was the soft thud of a backyard pitch landing in his glove, the first time the bat met the ball, and his father whooped loud enough to scare the birds. It was pulling on a jersey 2 sizes too big and seeing his last name curve across his shoulders. Lately, that joy had worn thin. Practices had become a string of dread. His name barked like a warning. Every mistake turned into a show for the whole team. The stake hanging in the air wasn't just whether he'd bruise. It was whether an 8-year-old boy would learn to love the game or learn to fear it. Bear looked around the bar at the men in front of him, big, bearded, inked from wrist to shoulder, and spoke in the same steady tone he'd used on Tank. "Miller, youth field. He's got his hands on Tank's boy," he said. That was all. Chairs scraped back, gloves were tugged on, helmets came down from hooks. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. These were men who remembered their own bad coaches, their own moments of being small and scared with no one stepping in. "Full colors," Bear added, tucking his helmet under his arm. "We're not going there to swing first. We're going so every parent and every board member sees exactly where the line is. Nobody lays a hand on a kid and keeps a whistle in this town. Not after tonight." His gaze met those of the oldest members, the ones with deep lines at the corners of their eyes from years of squinting into sun and trouble alike. They gave small, grim nods. This wasn't a bar fight. This was church. This was court. Across town, garage doors rattled open. Engines turned over, one by one, low growls building into rolling thunder. Black and chrome bikes backed into the street, headlamps flicking on as riders in black, sleeveless leather vests settled into their seats. Full-sleeve tattoos flexed over strong arms, skull ink flashing on bare biceps as gloves tightened on handlebars. Neighbors peeked through curtains. They'd seen this club ride out for charity runs and hospital visits. Tonight, the air felt different, sharper, like the moment before lightning hits. At the field, practice limped on. Miller barked new orders like nothing had happened, ignoring the way a few parents watched him now with narrowed eyes. Leo sat on the end of the bench, glove back in his lap, shoulders curled inward. He stared at the dirt between his cleats, counting pebbles so he wouldn't cry. When he finally looked up, he saw his father standing by the fence. Boots planted, arms loose, gaze locked on him. Tank didn't smile or wave. He just nodded once, slow and certain. The message was clear, even without words. "I see you. I'm here. You're not alone." Out on the road leading to the school, the first wave of Harleys crested the hill. At the front rode Bear, his black sleeveless vest flaring just enough to flash the Hell's Angels phoenix on his back, full-sleeve tattoos and skull ink visible beneath. Behind him, bike after bike followed, headlamps glowing in the dusk like a moving constellation. They weren't racing. They didn't have to. The sound of them alone announced that something at that little field was about to change for good. As those engines rolled closer, the real stakes came into focus. This wasn't just about one dropped fly ball or one bad practice. It was about what a town would decide to tolerate. It was about whether kids learned that adults could be checked, that bullies could be faced, that family didn't always share your last name. Sometimes it wore leather and rode a Harley. The Hell's Angels weren't coming for revenge. They were coming to make a promise. From this night on, anyone who called themselves coach would think hard before raising a hand to a child. Before those bikes pull into the parking lot and that promise takes shape in chrome and leather, pause with them for a moment. If stories like this, about quiet kids, stubborn fathers, and unlikely guardians, matter to you, remember there are more of them out there. You can be part of the family that shows up, too, by standing beside the ones who are small and scared, and by never staying silent when someone like Coach Miller crosses the line. The first thing people noticed wasn't the sight of the bikes. It was the sound. A low, rolling thunder came in from the road beyond the outfield fence, rattling the loose boards under the bleachers and silencing a few mid-sentence conversations. Parents shaded their eyes and turned. Kids on the playground stopped mid-swing. Even the birds in the oak trees lining the parking lot seemed to fall quiet as the line of Harleys appeared, one after another, like a metal river flowing down the hill. They poured into the lot in an orderly column, not racing, not fishtailing, not showing off. Each rider eased into a space, kickstand down, engine idling just long enough for the next bike to roll in. Black, sleeveless leather vests flashed under the sinking sun, the Hell's Angels phoenix patch catching the light. Full-sleeve tattoos flexed as gloved hands twisted throttles off. Skulls inked on biceps shifted under skin as men swung their legs over and stood up in one fluid, practiced motion. To anyone who'd never seen them before, they looked like trouble. To Tank, they looked like home. Leo heard it before he saw it. The sound rolled through his chest, something deep and familiar that tugged his eyes toward the parking lot. He'd fallen asleep to that sound when he was younger, soft through the window when the club dropped his father off late. Now, hearing it all at once, hundreds of engines together, made the hairs on his arms stand up. He slid along the bench until he could see around the dugout post. His breath caught. The whole lot was filling with bikes, more than he'd ever seen in one place. And in the middle of them, walking forward like the tide parting around a rock, was Bear. Tank felt his shoulders drop half an inch as he watched the men dismount. He'd told Bear the facts. The rest was in the club's hands now. Still, as boots hit gravel and vests creaked, a small, old fear whispered in his ear. What if this goes bad? What if Leo sees the part of me I've tried to bury? He tightened his jaw, forcing himself back to the promise Bear had made on the phone. No swinging first, no chaos. This wasn't about Tank's pride. It was about a boy who'd just learned that grown men could hurt you, and no one would stop them. Until now. On the field, Coach Miller looked up, annoyed that something dared compete with his voice. His eyes narrowed as the bikes kept coming. Parents had turned toward the lot, some already pulling out phones, some stepping closer to their kids. The practice he commanded so completely a minute ago now felt like a side act to a much larger presence. Miller jammed 2 fingers into his whistle and blasted a shrill note. "Eyes on me," he barked. "Forget the circus in the parking lot. We're not done here until someone on this team remembers how to catch a fly ball." The whistle cut through the air, but it didn't have the same grip as before. A few boys flinched, habit reacting before thought, but their gazes slid back toward the bikes anyway. Leo stayed frozen on the bench, glove in his lap, eyes splitting the distance between his coach and the black vests stepping off chrome. In his chest, panic and something else fought for space. Fear knew Miller's routines. Hope, shy and unsure, recognized the way those men moved, like the way his dad walked into a room and somehow made everything feel less dangerous. Bear didn't hurry. He walked with the slow, deliberate stride of someone who'd never once needed to raise his voice to be heard. Gravel crunched under his boots, the tail of his black sleeveless vest shifting just enough to show the phoenix patch on his back. Full-sleeve tattoos wrapped his arms, the skull on his bicep grinning under faded ink. Behind him, the Hells Angels fell in step without being told, spreading out in a semicircle near the chain-link fence that separated the parking lot from the field. They didn't climb it. They didn't rattle it. They just stood there, silent, a dark wall of leather and ink and unblinking eyes. Parents drifted toward the fence, caught between concern and curiosity. A few recognized some of the men from charity rides, from a toy run at Christmas, from helmets left respectfully at hospital doors. Others clutched purses or tightened arms around their children, unsure which stories to believe. One thing was certain. Whatever was happening at that field had just become bigger than a dropped fly ball. Bear stopped at the fence beside Tank. For a moment, they didn't speak. They just watched. Miller had lined the boys up for another drill, barking instructions. Leo stood at the end of the line, shoulders hunched, glove loose in his hand. The collar of his jersey was still rumpled where fingers had twisted it. Bear's eyes took it in, the little details that told the story Tank hadn't needed to describe. The faint red mark at the base of the boy's throat, the way his teammates leaned away from him, like trouble could jump from one kid to another. "That him?" Bear asked quietly, nodding toward the boy, not the coach. Tank swallowed, the word catching for a second before it came out. "Yeah," he said. "That's my son." The word son landed heavy between them, thicker than oil, older than chrome. Bear's jaw flexed. He took a slow breath, eyes never leaving the field. "You still good?" he asked. "You touch no one unless I tell you." Tank's fingers tightened on the fence. The old fight in him burned hot, wanting a target. But he thought of Leo's eyes if he saw his father explode. He thought of the promise he'd made the day he first held that tiny newborn fist. "I'm good," Tank said. "You handle it." The school doors banged open. The principal, a woman in a blazer and sensible shoes, stepped out onto the sidewalk with 2 teachers at her heels. Her eyes widened at the sight of the parking lot. For a moment, she looked like someone who'd walked into the wrong movie. Then the phones in the crowd registered for her, parents already filming, cameras panning from the coach to the bikers to the school sign behind her. She straightened her shoulders and headed down toward the field, jaw set. Bear watched her approach without moving from the fence. He didn't want to spook anyone. They weren't here to occupy the school or scare kids. They were here to draw a line where too many adults had erased it. When the principal got close enough, he tipped his chin in a polite half-nod. "Evening, ma'am," he said, voice steady and low. "Name's Bear. We're here because one of your coaches put his hands on a child." He didn't raise his volume, but somehow people 50 feet away heard every word. Silence rippled outward like someone had killed the stadium lights. The principal's head snapped toward Miller. He had his hands on his hips now, clearly annoyed that his practice had been interrupted by what he saw as a performance. "This is private team business," he barked, striding toward the fence. "You can't just—" His words cut off when he got close enough to really see who stood on the other side. Bear didn't step back. Neither did the men flanking him, their skull tattoos and phoenix patches plainly visible. Their faces weren't angry in the way Miller understood anger. There was no wildness there, just a cold, calm certainty that made his chest tighten. "You coach Miller?" Bear asked, tone almost conversational. Miller drew himself up, trying to reclaim ground. "I am," he said. "And I don't know who you people think you are, but—" Bear lifted a hand just a few inches, and Miller's words stalled without his permission. "We're the ones who got the call when you grabbed an 8-year-old boy by the shirt and lifted him off his feet," Bear said. "We're the ones who show up when grown men forget the difference between coaching and cruelty." He nodded toward Leo. "That boy over there? He's family. You put your hands on family." Around them, parents shuffled in closer. A few mothers put hands over their mouths, eyes darting to Leo. Fathers who'd grumbled in the stands for seasons, but never walked down to the board meeting, suddenly found themselves standing shoulder to shoulder with tattooed bikers at the fence. Kids drifted in from the outfield, drawn by the tension like static. Some clutched their caps, some clung to water bottles, all of them sensing that the script of grown-ups always back the coach was being rewritten in real time. The principal swallowed, her gaze flicking from Bear to Miller to the growing sea of cameras held at chest level. "Coach Miller," she said, voice tighter than she wanted. "Is there any truth to what they're saying?" Miller seized on her address like a lifeline. "They're outsiders," he snapped. "This is just another attempt by coddling parents to undermine discipline. These boys need to learn to take correction. That kid," he jabbed a finger toward Leo, "is soft. He dropped an easy fly ball, and I gave him a talking to. That's all." Bear's eyes narrowed just slightly. "A talking to," he repeated. "That what you call it?" He didn't look at Miller when he spoke next. He looked past him, straight at Leo. "Hey, kid," Bear called, voice lowering, gentling in a way that made a few parents blink. "Henry Leo, right? You mind coming over here a second?" Leo froze. Every instinct told him to stay small, stay quiet, avoid attention. But Tank gave another one of those slow, steady nods, his knuckles white on the fence. Leo's legs felt like they were filled with sand, but they moved anyway. He walked up, glove pressed to his stomach like armor. Bear crouched a little to take some of the height out of things, the leather of his vest creaking softly. Up close, Leo could see the details of the phoenix patch, the tiny nicks in Bear's knuckles, the gray threaded through his slicked-back hair. His eyes, dark and steady, didn't look scary. They looked serious. "Henry," Bear said quietly, low enough that if the field had been noisy, only the closest folks would hear. "I'm Bear. I'm a friend of your dad's. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to know something before you answer. You won't be in trouble for telling the truth. Not with us. Not with your dad." A tear escaped the corner of Leo's eye before he could stop it. He nodded, throat tight. Bear glanced up at Tank, just for a second, making sure the father was holding steady. Then he turned back to the boy. "Did Coach lift you up by your shirt?" Bear asked. No extra words, no leading tone. Leo's fingers dug into his glove. Yes, sir," he whispered. "Did he poke you in the head?" Bear asked. Leo's voice shook, but it got a little louder. "Yes, sir." Bear's gaze stayed soft. "Did you feel safe when he did that?" Leo shook his head hard, a sob catching in his chest. "No." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. A murmur rippled through the team. One boy near the middle of the line blurted out, "He grabbed me last week too." Another, cheeks flushing, added, "He slapped my helmet when I missed a pitch. It hurt." Their parents turned, shocked, some with regret carving lines into their faces where complacency had sat before. The stories tumbled out like they'd been waiting at the back of their throats for an exit. The principal looked like someone had pulled the floor 2 inches to the left. Whatever she'd expected when she walked out those doors, it wasn't multiple children, on record, in front of cameras and witnesses, describing physical intimidation. She turned slowly to Coach Miller. "Is this true?" she asked, the formality stripped from her voice now. Miller's bravado wavered, but only for a heartbeat. "They're exaggerating," he scoffed. "Kids misremember things. They're emotional. You give an inch on discipline, you lose the whole—" A distant wail cut through his words. Sirens. One of the parents had already dialed 911 the second the bikes started filling the lot. Within moments, a squad car turned into the school driveway, lights flickering red and blue across chrome and chain link. The officer inside slowed as he took in the scene. A quiet line of Hell's Angels at the fence, dozens of parents with phones out, a coach red-faced and gesturing wildly, a cluster of kids around a small boy with tear-streaked cheeks. Bear didn't flinch at the sight of the cruiser. He stepped back from the fence just enough to give the officer a clear path. The club members shifted too, opening a lane without being asked. This wasn't a standoff. It was an invitation. Let everything be seen. Let nothing be whispered about later in parking lots and corners. The officer stepped out, one hand resting near his belt out of habit, the other shading his eyes. It took him half a second to recognize Bear and a couple of the other bikers from a charity ride the department had escorted last Christmas. His shoulders dropped a fraction, but his face stayed professional. "Evening," he said. "Somebody want to tell me what's going on?" Before Miller could launch into a speech about interference, Bear tilted his head toward Leo. "Be better if you start with the kids," he said evenly. There was no challenge in his tone, just a quiet suggestion from a man who'd seen what happened when adults told their version first. The officer hesitated, then surprised himself by nodding. He crouched down near Leo, his voice softer than the bark that came with traffic stops. "Hey, buddy," he said. "Name?" "Henry Leo," the boy mumbled. "Henry Leo," the officer repeated. "You mind telling me what your coach did today?" Leo told him. Halting at first, then steadier as the officer's pen scratched over his notebook and nods from Bear and Tank anchored him. Other kids chimed in when the officer turned. Parents added times they'd seen similar things, but hadn't wanted to cause trouble. Miller sputtered objections, but each one sounded smaller as details piled up. Dates, drills, words he'd forgotten, but the kids never had. The field that had been his kingdom an hour ago now felt like a courtroom where he sat at the wrong table. The officer rose slowly, closing his notebook. He looked at the principal, at the cluster of parents, at the wall of bikers who had stayed behind the fence the whole time. "I'm going to forward this to CPS and the district," he said. "For now, Coach, I'm going to ask you to step away from the kids tonight. Practice is over." Miller's face went bright red. "You can't do that," he exploded. "We've got a tournament this weekend. You have no right to—" Bear's voice slid into the space between Miller's words like a door quietly closing. "He has every right," Bear said. "Those aren't your punching bags. They're children. You lost the privilege of standing in front of them the first time you decided fear worked better than teaching." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move closer than the fence. And yet somehow, every person on that field felt the weight of what he said. The principal took a breath that seemed to drag half the town through her lungs. "Coach Miller," she said, tone formal in a new way. "You're suspended from all coaching duties, effective immediately, pending investigation. I'll notify the league board tonight. There will be no practices or games on this field until we sort this out." Her words carried beyond the diamond, up to the classrooms where after-school clubs were meeting, out to the buses parking on the side street. Teachers poked their heads out of doors. A janitor paused mid-mop. For one stunned moment, the normal hum of school life faltered and stopped. That was how the Hells Angels shut down a whole school. Not by storming hallways or kicking down doors, but by forcing the people in charge to finally hit stop on a machine that had kept running over small voices for years. The principal turned to the officer. "Can you stay while we dismiss the kids?" she asked. "I want everyone to go straight home. No after-practice hanging around tonight." The officer nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Over the loudspeaker, her voice soon echoed. "Attention students and staff. All after-school activities are canceled. Please prepare for immediate dismissal." Buses that would have left in staggered waves now lined up at once. Club meetings broke up early. Teachers walked kids out in small groups, eyes flicking to the parking lot, where a strange council of leather and authority stood side by side. The routines that made up the background noise of the school day, the ones kids trusted even more than bells, had been interrupted. Not for a snowstorm, not for a fire drill, but for the sake of one small boy in a dirty jersey and the others who'd been too scared to speak. Coach Miller ripped his whistle off his neck, the cord snapping loudly. He shoved it into his bag so hard the zipper snagged. As he trudged toward the lot, every step felt heavier. The boys didn't follow him. They clustered near their parents and teachers, some glancing nervously his way, others steadfastly looking at the ground. He could feel the weight of phone cameras on his back like sunburn. The usual comfort of the board's protection suddenly felt thin as tissue paper. As he passed the line of bikes, several Hells Angels turned their heads to watch him. No one stepped into his path. No one spat insults. The silence said enough. It said, "We saw you." It said, "We know what you did." It said, "Whatever happens next, you won't be able to pretend no one ever called you to account." Miller avoided their eyes, fumbling his keys, finally slamming his car door harder than he meant to. The engine started, but as he pulled away, it sounded small and strained against the low, steady purr of the bikes. When the immediate storm had passed, when Miller's taillights disappeared and the principal headed back to her office with the officer, Bear finally stepped through the gate onto the field. A few bikers followed, spreading out just enough to give space but still form a quiet backdrop. Tank walked beside him. Leo stood near home plate, cleats scuffing the dirt, unsure where to put his eyes. Bear stopped in front of the boy and his father. He looked at Tank first. "You did good," he said simply. "You called. You didn't swing." Tank's throat worked. Coming from anyone else, it might have sounded patronizing. From Bear, it landed like a medal pinned on a chest. He nodded, not trusting his voice yet. Then Bear turned to Leo. "You did good too," he told him. "You told the truth, even though it was scary. That's harder than catching any fly ball." Leo sniffed, swiping at his cheeks with the back of his hand. "I messed up the ball," he whispered, shame still gnawing at him. Bear shook his head slowly. "You dropped a ball," he said. "That's baseball. Everybody drops one. What matters is what the people around you do when it happens. A coach is supposed to help you figure out how to catch the next one, not make you afraid to ever try again. You understand?" Leo looked up, really looked, and for the first time that day, a tiny spark of something like relief flickered in his chest. He nodded. Around them, other bikers knelt to talk to kids, their big, tattooed arms resting lightly on their own knees so as not to crowd small bodies. They swapped stories about missed catches and blown plays from their own childhoods, laughing softly at themselves. A few held out fists for timid knuckle bumps, big skull tattoos stark against the soft curve of a child's knuckles. To anyone driving by, it might have looked like a strange gathering. To the kids on that field, it felt like proof that big didn't always mean dangerous, and tough didn't always mean cruel. The sun dipped lower, painting the field in gold, the bases casting long shadows. The school's routines had been broken for the night. Tomorrow there would be meetings and statements and a lot of adults scrambling to explain why it had taken a wall of motorcycles to make them listen. But standing there in the dirt, breathing in the mingled smells of grass and gasoline and sweat, Leo didn't care about tomorrow yet. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid to wear his jersey. The field looked different in the half-light after the buses left. Trash barrels stood like sentries along the foul lines, and a stray ball lay forgotten near second base. The chatter of kids had faded into distant engine noise and the occasional car door closing. What hadn't faded was the feeling that something had been knocked loose and couldn't quietly slide back into place. A line had been drawn in the dirt, and no one could pretend not to see it. Within an hour, the league board's group chat lit up. Screens buzzed on kitchen tables and nightstands, links to shaky phone videos, messages from the principal, copies of the officer's preliminary report. Some board members tried to calm the storm with the same old phrases. "We should wait for all the facts." "He's won championships for us." "Parents are too sensitive these days." But this time, the facts weren't whispered in hallways. They were written in statements, recorded on camera, spoken in quavering 8-year-old voices that no one could unhear. 3 days later, the town's community center smelled like coffee, old varnish, and nerves. The league board had called an emergency meeting. Word had spread faster than any tournament schedule ever had. Parents came straight from work, still in scrubs, uniforms, and business slacks. Teachers found a seat in the back. And along the far wall, filling the last row but not a single aisle, sat the Hells Angels. They hadn't come in riding hard or revving engines. They'd parked a few blocks away, walked in quiet. Black, sleeveless leather vests with the Hells Angels Phoenix patch rested against metal folding chairs. Full-sleeve tattoos curled along forearms, skull tattoos on biceps catching the fluorescent light. They didn't cross their arms to look threatening. They folded them to keep their hands still. They weren't here to vote or to scare anyone into a decision. They were here for the same reason as every parent, to see what kind of adults ran the league that held their kids' hearts. At the front, the league president tapped a stack of papers against the table until they lined up perfectly. His tie was a little too tight. His voice when he spoke was a little too loud. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began. "As you know, there was an incident at last Thursday's practice. Our goal tonight is to gather information and find a path forward that protects our players and preserves the integrity of our league." "Protects our players," Bear repeated under his breath, just loud enough for Tank to hear. Tank's hand flexed on his knee. "Good words," Bear added. "Let's see if they mean them." The room felt like a held breath. People shifted. Chairs creaked. Coffee sloshed in paper cups. For once, no one checked the score of a game on their phone. This was the game now. One by one, parents stepped up to the microphone. Some clutched notes, others spoke straight from memory. They talked about how their boys had changed over the season, how laughter had shrunk, how stomach aches spiked on practice days. They shared the little details, helmet slaps, jersey yanks, words that sounded like motivation until you saw the way a child flinched at a raised hand. The board members listened, some with folded arms, some with eyes fixed on the table, some looking like they'd swallowed something sharp. When it was Tank's turn, he didn't bring notes. He walked to the front in his black, sleeveless vest, boots thudding softly on the linoleum, skull tattoo visible on his bicep. You could feel the room's hesitation tighten, prejudice and stereotypes catching on the sight of leather. Then he spoke, voice even, almost quiet. "My name is Daniel Parker, but most folks call me Tank," he said. "My son is Henry Leo. You've heard his name enough this week. You've probably heard mine, too." He told them what he'd seen. No embellishment, no extra heat. Just the picture that had burned into his mind. His boy on his toes, shirt twisted, a grown man's finger stabbing at his forehead. He talked about the phone call, about how it had felt to choose his club over his fists. "I came here tonight," he said, "not because I hate this league, but because my son loved this game before he met that man. I'd like him to have a chance to love it again. I'd like other kids to never have this story at all." When Tank stepped down, the room was quiet. The league president cleared his throat. His eyes had drifted more than once to the back row where the black vests sat. You could see him wrestling with the part of himself that wanted to ignore them, and the part that knew ignoring them had started this mess. At last, he gestured. If the representative of the Hells Angels would like to say something, we'll hear it now," he said. Bear rose slowly. He walked to the front with his thumbs hooked loosely in his belt, tattoos moving under his skin like old stories. When he turned to face the crowd, the room went still. "Name's Bear," he said simply. "I'm president of the local Hells Angels chapter. We're not a part of your league. We don't want to be. But some of our brothers' kids play on your fields. Some of yours will grow up and ride with us, or work in our shops, or sit next to us in church. That makes what happens out there our concern, too. He didn't rant. He didn't threaten. He told them what he'd seen on the field, what he'd heard from Leo and the other boys, what the officer had written down. Then he did something unexpected. He turned from the board to the crowd. "Some of you in here have been gritting your teeth through this for years," he said. "You told each other in the parking lot, and then you drove home and hoped next season would be better. I'm not here to shame you. I know what it's like to feel like the people in charge won't listen. But I will say this. The only reason we're all in this room tonight is because a scared kid told the truth and a father made a call instead of a fist." Bear faced the board again. "We're not asking to run your league," he said. "We're asking you to do what you say on your mission statement, to create a safe environment for kids to learn and grow. That means no coach, not one, gets to put his hands on a child in anger. That means you make it easy for kids and parents to speak up without being called soft. And if you need help writing that down or enforcing it, we'll sit at the table with you. In vests, in jackets, in whatever makes you comfortable. We don't need our name on anything. We just want our kids to walk onto those fields without wondering who they have to be afraid of." The board huddled in the corner after the testimonies, voices low, faces pale under the fluorescent lights. They weren't just weighing one coach's fate. They were staring at the cost of years of looking the other way. Behind them, the crowd murmured. Then fell silent, then murmured again. Parents leaned toward each other, sharing looks that said, "If they don't fix this, we will." The Hells Angels sat still as carved stone along the back wall, an unmoving line of witnesses. When the league president came back to the microphone, the stack of papers in his hands shook just a little. After reviewing the officer's report, the principal's statement, and the testimony given here tonight, he said, "The board has voted unanimously to terminate Coach Miller from all coaching duties and to permanently ban him from league activities." A long breath seemed to leave the room all at once. "Effective immediately," he went on, "we are suspending all practices and games for 1 week while we implement a new code of conduct and reporting procedures. We'll be establishing a hotline and an independent committee to handle complaints, and we will be requiring training for all coaches on appropriate discipline." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a magic wand. But it was a start. A real, written, on-the-record start. A few parents clapped, the sound hesitant at first, then growing until it filled the room. Some cried quietly. Some just sagged in their seats like someone had finally taken the weight off their shoulders. Tank closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. Fired. Banned. New rules. New ways to be heard. Leo might not understand all the details yet, but he would feel the difference on the field. A week later, the field smelled like cut grass and fresh chalk. The sky was a clear, clean blue, the kind that made you forget storms for a while. Leo stood near the dugout, fingers fidgeting with the brim of his cap. The new coach, a soft-spoken math teacher named Mr. Reyes, who'd volunteered after years of helping his own kids in the backyard, called the team over with a simple clap and a smile, not a whistle blast. "All right, guys," Mr. Reyes said, voice steady, eyes kind. "First things first. I know last week was a lot." A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the group. "Here's the deal," he went on. "We're going to work hard. We're going to try stuff. We're going to mess up. That's how this works. My job is to help you get better, not to make you afraid to play. You drop a ball, we talk about how to catch the next one. Nobody here is going to get grabbed or shoved or scared on purpose. Not by me, not by any adult wearing this league's logo. You hear me?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," rose up, some voices stronger than others, but all of them relieved. At the fence, Tank watched, one hand resting loosely on the chain link. Beside him stood Bear and a couple of other bikers, still in their black, sleeveless vests, phoenix patches and skull tattoos visible. This time, the parents near them didn't edge away. Some nodded greetings. One mom brought over a thermos of coffee without being asked who they were there for. The biker's presence didn't feel like a siren anymore. It felt like a shadow that chose where to lean. Mr. Reyes moved them into flyball drills. "Leo, you're up," he called. The name still made Leo's stomach flip, but it wasn't the cold drop it used to be. He jogged out to shallow left field, glove feeling heavy in his hand. Mr. Reyes tossed the ball into the air, the white leather spinning lazily against the blue. As it climbed, time stretched. Leo heard the distant murmur of parents talking, the soft rumble of a bike idling somewhere down the street, his own heartbeat thudding behind his ribs. The ball came down a little faster than he expected. It smacked off the heel of his glove and bounced away, rolling into the grass. For a split second, everything inside him seized. He braced for a shout, for fingers on his shirt, for the burn of humiliation. Instead, he heard Mr. Reyes's voice, calm and matter-of-fact. "Okay, pause," the coach called. "Leo, come here a sec." The boy walked in, shame prickling his ears. Mr. Reyes held up the ball. "You got under it," he said. "You tracked it. That's good. It hit here instead of here." He tapped the glove's pocket. "Next one, I want you to watch the stitches and pull it in like you're hugging it. Got it?" Leo nodded. "We're trying again," the coach added, "because that's what we do with mistakes. We try again." The next ball arced higher, hanging for a heartbeat against the sun. Leo squinted, adjusted, remembered the hug. The ball dropped into the pocket of his glove with a satisfying thud. His knees bent to absorb it, and he squeezed tight. For a second, he didn't move, afraid that if he breathed, it would fall out. Then he heard clapping from the sideline. Parents, kids, even a low whistle from one of the bikers at the fence. Leo grinned, a real grin this time, and threw the ball back in. By the end of the season, the league looked different. The code of conduct hung on the wall of every dugout, not as wallpaper, but as a promise signed by every coach. Complaint forms sat in a clearly marked box near the concession stand. Kids knew they could talk to a designated player advocate if something felt wrong. And once a month, the league hosted something new. Family Day. On Family Day, dads in work boots and moms in office shoes trotted awkwardly around the bases with their kids, laughing at themselves. Coaches ran silly relay races. And at the far end of the field, a cluster of Hell's Angels bikes sat like a museum exhibit. Kids lined up with signed permission slips to sit on them for photos, small hands gripping handlebars, while big tattooed arms held the bikes steady. Bear stood nearby, answering questions from curious grandparents who'd once only seen men like him on the evening news. One evening, after most of the crowd had drifted toward the parking lot, Leo and Tank lingered in the outfield. The sky was turning pink at the edges. Fireflies hadn't started yet, but you could feel them waiting. Tank tossed a ball in his hand, leather popping softly. "One more?" he asked. Leo nodded, planting his cleats. The ball sailed toward him in a smooth arc. Leo moved under it, glove up, eyes steady. He caught it clean and fired it back with a little extra snap in his wrist. Tank caught the throw and laughed, the sound full and easy. "You're getting fast," he said. "I'm gonna need a better glove to keep up." Leo shrugged, but his chest puffed a little. Coach says I got good tracking, he offered. Says I don't flinch like I used to. Tank swallowed against the lump that rose in his throat. Coach is right, he said. He looked toward the fence, where a couple of black vests still leaned, talking quietly, keeping a lazy watch as the last kids packed up. You know, Tank added, the day I called Bear, I was scared you were going to see the worst of me. Thought you'd remember your old man as the guy who lost it on a baseball field. Leo frowned, confused. You didn't hit anybody, he said. You called your family. The word landed on Tank differently this time. Not just blood, not just bikers. Family. The network of people who had shown up when one small boy was hurt and scared. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I did. Years have a way of tracing circles, bringing you back to the same places with different eyes. On a soft summer evening, long after Coach Miller's name had slipped out of daily conversation and into the file cabinets of memory, the town's baseball field once again held a lanky teenager in a jersey with Parker across the back. Henry Leo had stretched into his height, the cap now fitting just right, his glove moving with relaxed confidence. His number was smudged with dirt, same as always. Some things don't change. Tank sat on the bleachers this time, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone lukewarm, watching his boy joke with teammates. Bear stood at his usual spot near the fence, black sleeveless vest still bearing the phoenix patch, tattoos faded slightly but no less vivid, skull bicep ink smiling as he leaned on the metal. A few of the other Hell's Angels were there too, out of habit now as much as purpose. They were background, part of the scenery, like the scoreboard, like the oak trees, like the smell of popcorn from the snack shack. If you asked a new parent about them, they might say, "Oh, those guys? They're just there. They don't bother anyone. They helped rewrite the rules a while back. My kid thinks they're cool." The fear had drained out of the word biker in this place, replaced by something more complicated, more honest. The leather vests still looked tough. The tattoos still told stories in ink. But around here, most of those stories ended with someone smaller standing a little taller. As Leo stretched his arm and rolled his shoulder, his gaze wandered, just for a heartbeat, to that familiar spot at the fence. For a flicker of a second, his mind replayed the other night. The one with the sirens and the shouting and the thick knot of fear in his stomach. But when the memory came now, it didn't stop there. It kept going, to Bear's quiet questions, to the officer's notebook, to the board meeting, to Mr. Reyes's calm voice after a dropped ball. The old fear loosened another notch. He lifted his glove to Bear in a tiny salute. Bear grinned, lines deepening at the corners of his eyes, and tipped an invisible cap back. You could say this whole story started with a mistake. A dropped fly ball from a small, scared boy. But that's not the real beginning. The real beginning was what people did after the mistake. One man chose control over rage. One boy chose truth over silence. One club chose presence over violence. One community, finally, chose courage over convenience. Somewhere, in the back of a desk drawer, a cracked plastic whistle lay forgotten under a pile of old rosters and yellowed scorecards. It didn't mean much anymore, except as a reminder. Authority isn't in the whistle. It's in how you treat the people who have to listen to it. On the field, a different kind of authority now ruled. The kind that corrected without crushing, that taught without tearing down. After a later game, someone suggested a team photo. Kids in dusty uniforms crowded around home plate, grinning and shoving each other playfully. Parents gathered behind them, arms slung over shoulders. Then, almost as an afterthought, a voice called out, "Hey Bear, Tank, get in here!" The bikers hesitated for just a second, not used to being invited into these kinds of pictures. But the kids were already waving them over. "Come on!" Leo shouted. "You're part of this!" They stepped in, leather vests against jerseys, skull tattoos against small shoulders. A mom with a smartphone counted down. 3, 2, 1. The camera clicked, freezing a moment that would live on fridge doors and social media feeds and memory for years, a town that had learned, the hard way, what it wanted to stand for. Later, as the sun slid down and the field lights flicked off, the Harleys rolled out of the lot, one by one. Engines rumbled low, not needing to prove anything. Kids on the sidewalk waved. Some mimed twisting a throttle, already dreaming of someday riding something bigger than a bicycle. Parents waved too, not out of obligation, but out of honest gratitude. In rearview mirrors, the field shrank to a patch of green and then to memory. Stories like this don't fix every field, every league, every school. Somewhere, another child is still staring at the dirt between their shoes, wondering if anyone will show up for them. But what happened in that little town hangs in the air like tire tracks on a dusty road. It whispers, "You don't have to stay quiet. You don't have to let 'that's just how he is' be the final word. You can draw a line. You can step up. You can pick up the phone instead of the fist." In the end, the lesson wasn't written on any scoreboard. It was written in the way Leo squared his shoulders when he walked onto the field, in the way coaches now bent down to talk eye to eye instead of towering over kids, in the way a town's heartbeat shifted each time engines rolled by. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather and full-sleeve tattoos and a skull on their bicep. Sometimes they stand behind a fence instead of on a pedestal. And family? Family is who shows up, who stands still when everyone else looks away, who lines the edge of a field in black vests and calm eyes and says, without shouting, "Not this kid, not today, not ever again." So if you're listening to this from a kitchen table, or a hospital chair, or the parking lot outside some field where your own kid is trying to be brave, remember Leo. Remember Tank's phone call. Remember the way a quiet wall of bikers shut down a whole school not with fists, but with presence and truth. And remember, you might not ride a Harley or wear a patch, but you can still be the one who shows up. Because heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather. And family is who shows up when it counts. Before we wrap this story, if it meant something to you, don't forget to show it. Hit the like button, share this video with someone who loves a good heart story, and subscribe to Gentle Bikers so you don't miss the next ride. And down in the comments, tell us where you're watching from and who you're riding for in your life.